Welcome to Mental Health Today. I'm Mike Murray.
I'm Tony Clark.
Here on Mental Health Today, we'll be discussing confidence and self-esteem.
We will also be discussing Judgement in Suburbia, as well as my segment of Truth with Tony, where I will be focusing on my friend's suicide from 4 years ago this week.
All that and more on this episode of Mental Health Today. Welcome back to Mental Health Today. Well, we actually got comments from last week's show, and most of them were good.
That was a shocker for me, too.
Yeah, and we keep them all anonymous. Here is one. Great job, guys. Love the honesty and the direction of the show. Keep it up.
I have another comment here that says, I really like the messages in your show. You're doing something that is long overdue for people with mental illness. Keep it up because we need it.
All right, 2 for 2.
And the third comment, which came from a Facebook page where I posted the link to our show, it says, this is way too verbose. And the funny thing for me was I actually had to go look up the word verbose before I found out it was a negative comment. So thank you for your comment, and we will work on being less verbose.
We won't talk as much.
But thank you so much for your comments, and as always through this episode, please send your comments to the YouTube page underneath in the comments section, or you can email
mentalhealthtoday04@gmail.com. And in our next segment, confidence and self-esteem. It's a mental illness that no pill will cure. We're back, and we're going to discuss confidence and self-esteem. And you know, when you're talking about depression and anxieties and schizophrenia, you're talking about taking medication. It's medical illness, but confidence and self-esteem, there's no pill for confidence and self-esteem.
And this is the point where I want to strangle people. You know, when I'm sitting in those support groups that I go to, or dealing with people out on the street that are telling me their problems, and they're like, I just wish somebody would give me some self-confidence and self-esteem. And it's like they keep going to the doctor and they keep taking these pills, and they wonder why they're still in bed for 20 hours. Mm-hmm. And it's because they're not getting what they need from those medicines. Mm-hmm. And for me, it became getting off my ass. Mm-hmm. And actually doing something. Mm-hmm. You know, that's why I've told people it all starts with getting out of bed. Mm-hmm. And any excuse anybody wants to make for not being able to get out of bed, you know, the first time you make an excuse about something, okay, you made a mistake, you know, and that's fine. The second time you make an excuse for the same behavior, it's not a mistake, it's a choice.
But doesn't that put pressure on somebody, and doesn't that make it worse? Like, they can't get out of bed, and that pressure that they have on themselves to try to get out of bed?
I can only speak for me. I react better to people who are harder. I don't react to sensitivity. Mm-hmm. You know, if someone comes up, oh, everything's going to be fine, you're going to be okay, I don't react to that. That encourages me to be lazy. Mm-hmm. That encourages me not to do anything about my problem. Perfect example, 2003 to 2012. I was never in a hospital. 9 years of going without a psych ward visit. And it was all based on Halloween. I was discharged from Montgomery General in 2003. The security guard that walked me out, because I've been there so much, he said, "We'll see you by Thanksgiving." That comment pissed me off so much that I became determined. I said, I'm not going to end up back in the hospital. And I went 9 years before ending up back in the hospital.
You know, I spoke in front of family members, parents with kids with mental illness, and one of the questions that they asked is, well, why didn't you go on disability, or why did you actually try to work and go through that painful years of trying to work and while I was depressed? And I said, because I didn't want my parents to take care of me. I wanted to, you know, be able to take care of myself. I didn't want them to take care of me. So so there is something that you say about you know, forcing yourself to get up, to do these things. But at the same time, there's a sense of having to try to accept the illness and to say, okay, I can't get up today, but I'll try to get up tomorrow.
But then people don't accept the illness, and it goes into the self-medicating process. It goes into, okay, I can't get out of bed, which, again, I've told you, I don't believe in the words no, don't, won't, or can't. All those words eliminate options. And the only option is to self-medicate. Self-medicating is fine, but it works for a very short period of time, and then you become an addict.
Right.
Whether it's you're going shopping to make yourself feel better, spending money to make yourself feel better, having sex to make yourself feel better, gambling, drugs, alcohol. It's not just about the drugs and alcohol. It's about all the other things that we do to self-medicate. When we don't have money, but we go purchase a $200 item.
Yeah, and it's funny because when I started feeling confident, when I felt that I started to take charge of my situation after maybe a year of depression, it's like after a while after that, I started saying, well, now I can go back and smoke pot, I feel better, and I end up crashing again.
And
so,
it's a vicious,
yeah.
it just ends up being a vicious
It's
cycle.
a vicious cycle because it's a fake feeling of confidence and self-esteem.
But it's also my opinion that it becomes a vicious cycle because there's no one in that person's life to kind of light a fire under them. Again, this is just for me, but I still think it would work for everybody else. I'm a person who responds to negativity and aggression. And the people who light that fire under my ass by saying something stupid or making fun of me, and I just say, you know what, I'm gonna do this. You're saying I'm not doing this. I'm gonna do this just to prove you wrong.
You know, that's a lot of people do that. A lot of family members say, "Oh, you're a loser. You don't know," and that motivates them.
It does.
To start succeeding, doing well. And where can you get confidence and self-esteem? I mean, where do you get that from?
Well, for instance, I can only speak for myself. My confidence and self-esteem started by this gentleman right here telling me that I was a good storyteller and that he wanted to work on a book with me. And so I started working on the book with you, sending you emails and ideas and just of my thoughts and stuff. And through that, I started gaining confidence that my story could help somebody. And once I had that confidence that my story could help somebody, it gave me that self-worth. It gave me that, feeling of importance, that my life did matter. And so within, I think we agreed to start writing the book in April. By July, I was a completely different person. And leading into that, I want to bring up, I saw on the news about the suicides at Blake High School, and we've only been a month and a half into the school year, so we're looking at maybe 22 suicides at the high school. And we'll get into that in another episode. The reason I bring that up is because the clip that I saw talked about a girl who attempted suicide, called one of the hotlines and said she was threatening to kill herself because of she didn't get enough likes on her Instagram post.
Yeah.
And when I saw it, I was so enraged, and my wife's just like looking at me, and I'm just like, well, I guess I should kill myself. We only got 40 views from our TV show.
Right.
So all this stuff I have about the media and the problem with the media, I'm a media person now.
Yeah, and I'll just go back and give you some credit because you said we all know our own truth. And that gave me confidence and self-esteem. It's given me confidence and self-esteem in the past when I stopped trying to listen to everybody and say, oh yeah, I should do this, I should do, when you have to start saying, look, I know my own truth. I know what makes me tick. And although other people can give me suggestions and give me ideas on how to help myself, in the end, you know how you feel. And if you feel that you need help, you know, find support. If you feel that that you don't agree with your parents or friends, you know, do what makes you feel right, not what everybody else, or try to conform to everybody else.
But at the same time, it's an examination thing, and this is where the problem becomes. People say that they don't want to conform and they don't want to do things differently. But when they try something new, they go try something new, they feel better, but then they look at it as, this is too much work. And I've had those thoughts too. The thoughts of saying, you know, oh God, I don't know if I can handle this. Or I overanalyze just the fact of getting out of bed. And that's why I tell people, don't focus on the thought of it, just get out of bed first. And you know, it's almost like people, and I know this is probably inappropriate, but the people that I meet in these groups that I deal with online and in person, they're all filled with excuses. And I get tired of it, because I'm saying, I'm past that point. I'm past that point of making up excuses. I'm doing something. And I mentioned it last week. For so long, I was just a talker. Now I'm a doer. And I don't have time to waste in my life for someone who isn't going to help themselves.
I believe there's a fine line between being overly sensitive, I agree, and maybe being a little bit too harsh. But if you have any comments or would like to comment on this show is a support system, and you can comment on the YouTube page. You can also comment at mentalhealthtoday04@gmail.com, and we'll have that at the bottom of the screen as the show goes on. And we're going to head into our next segment, which is Judgment in Suburbia. We're back with Mental Health Today and the segment Judgment in Suburbia. And Tony, we spend a lot of time in Starbucks, and we've had a couple of instances there that are pretty unique, and something that definitely ties into Judgment in Suburbia.
It really does. Mike and I have a lot of discussions. We do talk about sports and, you know, our hobbies and things of that nature, but one of our favorite things to do is to examine our own lives, and out loud too. And we do it in, you know, front of people at Starbucks. We do it standing in line.
And we're loud.
And we're also not, but we're also not, we're not really paying attention to everybody else.
Right.
We're just having our dialogue and trying to get some kind of conversation going. Perfect example of that, the first time we spoke about an issue where I was talking about how everyone calls me Twisted Tony, and that I'm not a person who goes up and shoots up a school. As soon as I mentioned that, the person that was in front of us in line was a man on his phone. He took 3 steps away from us, further away from us, and turned away from us on his phone. It was the first thing I noticed, and I mentioned it to you right off the bat. I think a week or two later, we were standing in Starbucks in line, and I mentioned to you that I had a feeling and I wanted to know if you could relate or if it was an appropriate feeling. You know, it's kind of like I needed you to be my sounding board of saying, look, I've never had a friendship or a relationship where it was even. I always felt like I was down here and the person was up here. And in the middle of saying that to you, I'm not noticing the girl in front of us is in tears. And she puts all her stuff down and grabs me and hugs me. And it was one of the most amazing things that has happened to me, because I wasn't paying attention to anything else. I didn't care if I was being judged. I was just focused on getting a point out to you. and it affected the person in front of us. I think it affected the person behind us as
It
well.
did. She was in tears too.
Yeah. So we are the judges. In answer to your first question, you know, so you say, who are the judges? All of us are the judges. Mm-hmm. We judge everything, and it's human nature. And I think, but some people have different reactions to where they avoid it and turn away from it, and other people say, wow, how can this person be so open in public and show weakness? And it obviously related to her, and it motivated me. Getting that hug was the validation that it was okay that I felt that way. Mm-hmm. That was what the hug told me. Yeah, because it wasn't one of these cheap little, you know, pats on the back. It was a genuine, like, man, I feel your pain. And it helped me move forward.
Yeah, and I think that we learned something from this incident, that in one situation you get this different reaction, you don't get that empathy. In another situation you do get that empathy. And I think this ties back to the previous segment where we were talking about confidence and self-esteem, in that I was in a courtroom helping out a friend who was going through a court case, and I was a character witness, and I noticed that, or I observed that I hadn't been in a courtroom before, but that judge is literally a judge. He's going to make a decision on your future. He is literally judging you, and it's going to have consequences.
And that's his job.
That's his job. Other people, especially in today's social media, have their own opinions. There are so many opinions out there. There is so much judgment out there, but it really has no consequence. It's not their job to do it, and there's no consequence other than your own self-esteem if you take it to heart that they're judging you.
And I think another problem with that, and I've discussed this with several people, we become so overly sensitive that I've ran into people who will analyze every situation that they go through on a daily basis to death. And why did I do this? Or, you know, there becomes an unhealthy way of dealing with it. And to me, that's the unhealthy way of dealing with it, where you're constantly obsessing about what people say and think of you. And, you know, somebody has a bad day at work and they come home and my voice says, okay, well, was it really that bad of a day? Mm-hmm. You know, did you get fired? Did you punch somebody? Did you hurt somebody? Mm-hmm. No, I just don't like when people say certain things to me. Then it becomes an internal thing of saying, okay, well, I need to train myself to not be so oversensitive. Perfect example, sorry about that, but example would be the email I got the day before we recorded our first show. You know, a friend of a family member wanted to remind me that I was a useless, worthless piece of shit, and he promised that he would always remind me the last time I was in the hospital.
Oh, that's nice of him.
Obviously, he found out that I was doing this show and wanted to remind me what a useless piece of shit I was. Mm. Now, 10 months ago, I would give that message weight and say, you know what, they're right. But because I have self-confidence and self-esteem now, it brushed off my back. I laughed about it. I messaged you and I told you about it and I said I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
But then there's moments like the Starbucks moment where we hug, the validation, the acceptance. Mm-hmm. Those are all things that people don't pay attention to that mean so much, especially to someone with mental illness.
Yeah, you're right. And also, you know, mental illness is a constant thing that people keep with them. In other words, it's like a wound, and sometimes it heals up and you're recovered and you have self-esteem and confidence, and sometimes that wound gets opened up if something happens, like some people lose a job, or maybe there's something else that causes a lack of confidence and a lack of self-esteem, and then you're kind of back down there. So it's important to keep your own self-esteem, your own confidence. How do you keep that going?
That is a great point, because one of the things that I stressed to my wife this week was that I'm gonna have bad days. Even with having self-confidence and self-esteem now, there are going to be days that I am going to have a bad day. And I told her, I said, I need you to remind me. And that's where you let people know your needs. When I have days like that, remind me about my self-confidence and self-esteem. Remind me about the issues that I have overcome. That positive reinforcement that we talked about in the last segment can make those periods of time where I just don't feel right a lot less. Or if I'm feeling insecure, it makes me feel a little more secure. But I need to communicate that with people. I think I communicated with you this week that if you saw me getting not really motivated by this because I wasn't getting paid, that I needed you to remind me of the actual goal behind it. And then that would help me. And the only way to do that is to communicate to people.
Yeah.
If you don't communicate with people and then you want to sit there, because I've done this, you want to sit there, well, why won't anybody help me?
Yeah. You know, something about Judgment in Suburbia, because you kind of touched on it, is about money, and it's about that expectation of making money for something rather than the actual art of doing something or doing a service for others, like we try to do here. And I think let's discuss just for a second kids who are trying to achieve in high school and trying to go to a good school. When you're in a affluent area, you mentioned Blake High School. These are areas before Churchill High School in Potomac, Maryland. These are affluent areas where there's pressure to succeed, and there's this expectation to succeed. So you know, and there's this kind of judgment not only from others but from yourself. How do you how does a kid deal with that? Some kids actually get good grades. They get 4.0s. They go off to college though, and something happens, and they lose their confidence. They lose their self-esteem. That's happened to me before. And you fall into mental illness, and then all of a sudden you're stigmatized with that for the rest of your life.
Well, you just described the last segment of the first episode completely. A girl that went away to college.
Right.
And college hit her right between the eyes, and within 3 months she was dead.
Right.
You can't, you know, but your first point about them making money, there is nothing wrong with making money on mental illness as long as you don't lose sight of the first reason that you were doing it to begin with. Okay? I'm a person who can't do a volunteer job. There's no motivation. I can't motivate myself to do something for free. I just never have been able to do that. And then the argument becomes, well, you're 2 episodes into your show, you haven't seen a dime and you're still going. So there's always the other side of it to look at. Because I do have a goal with this. And I think I discussed it with you in the beginning that I had a 5-year plan because I thought I was going to be dead in 5 years. I don't feel that way anymore. I don't feel I'm going to be dead in 5 years. So I see this becoming a future and becoming something of a sounding board to other people who maybe aren't out of that darkness that I escaped from.
What about the fatalistic person who never, say, plans on retiring or doesn't plan for tomorrow because they don't see a tomorrow?
And again, that goes back to self-confidence and self-esteem. The person that doesn't see tomorrow, if they have self-confidence and self-esteem, they see tomorrow. They see next week. They see next month. How do I know? I've done it. I was there. That's how I know. That's why I joke with you about saying, you know, I have the experience. I may not have the degree, but I know what it takes to get off your ass and feel better.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it comes across very angrily with me, and I understand that because I want to choke these people. And I want to say, you could just feel so much better if you would just do one simple thing.
Yeah. And life can be very random. I mean, there may literally not be tomorrow, but that doesn't mean you don't plan for tomorrow, because to expect a future, like you said, that is self-esteem, that is confidence.
And along the lines with the money issues, you know, this state specifically, Maryland, spends so much money. And I was looking up some statistics from the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. And in the whole United States, there are 42,773 successful suicide attempts every year. That being said, there's 25 attempts that don't result in suicide. So if you do the math, that's 1,069,325 people who attempt suicide every year. And they gave a financial thing saying that each suicide or attempted suicide costs the country $41,096.
You know, it makes me think of the newsman, the local newscaster Jim Vance from Channel 4, who I heard speak this week at a National Association of Mental Illness Heroes event. And he's talked about an attempted suicide that he had back in 1987, where he put a gun in his mouth and he didn't pull the trigger, thank goodness. To me, he is a hero for not only admitting his addiction and his mental illness, discussing it, and he said so that he could help one person, it would be worth it. You've had a similar experience.
And this is hard for me to talk about, so I apologize right off the bat if I get a little emotional, but I was 16 years old, and a certain incident happened, which I will discuss in the next episode of bullying. And within 2 weeks of that incident, I was babysitting, and I was snooping through the person's house that I was babysitting, looking through all their stuff, and in the closet I found a box. And I opened up that box. It was halfway open already, and I just pushed it open, and a .45 was sitting there. And I looked at it, it was loaded, and immediately my thought was, this is finally the end. And I went and sat on that bed and just stared at the gun in my hand for like 5 minutes. I turned on the stereo. There was a song playing in the background by Bon Jovi called My Guitar Lies Bleeding in My Arms. I put the gun in my mouth. And I don't know whether it was the taste of steel or just the reality of what was about to happen. Everything hit me that kind of reality hit. And it was, I like to refer to it as instant sober, where it was just like, oh my God, this is it. I either pull the trigger or I move on. Well, I put the gun back in the case because it freaked me out. I also related to the song that was playing that I'll talk about at some other point. But that's what stopped me, that moment of clarity of saying, what the hell am I doing? You know, there's a very powerful feeling. For those of you, and I'm not encouraging it, but for those of you who've never had a gun in your mouth, you can't know what that's like.
Yeah.
You know, and to be at that desperate point of saying, okay, I'm ready for it to be over. And just automatically saying, I can't pull the trigger.
Yeah, one last point. When in the recovery rooms for addiction, there's people who say, there's so many people who end up dying from addiction. It's like a slow suicide, and they say, why was it them and why wasn't it me? And of course, I know somebody, I was telling you, who actually pulled the trigger, and it's kind of like, why was it them and why wasn't it me? And I guess there's no real answer to that.
And that's the problem, because we as human beings, we need an answer to everything. If you notice on the news, whenever there's a story about a serial killer or even 9/11, different things like that, we immediately need a name.
Yeah.
For that feeling of safety and security to return. And the reasonings behind, you know, whatever. So when we get those, it's kind of like I told you about how I feel about the media, and the media is the god of the world, and it's also the devil of the world.
Yeah.
Because it controls all the information that we receive.
Yeah.
And
I think when you're at that point, when you're on, my case, when you're on the roof and you want to jump off, you say to yourself, this is the end. And you have to say to yourself, it can get better. And it does, and it can, and you're an example of it, and I'm an example of it, and there are so many people who are examples of it can get better.
The problem becomes someone else needs to tell you that.
Yeah.
I did not respond, I did not have any self-worth of any kind until somebody else gave it to me. That wasn't a family member, that's key too. I don't tend to believe my family when they tell me, oh, you're doing good, you know, blah, 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 because they spend so much focus on my negativity and the negative things that happen. So I don't put a lot of weight when I get encouragement from my family. But when my friends and the people in my support group tell me, you know, I have those 7 people that I utilize on a weekly basis outside of the support group and say, talk to them on a daily basis. Those are the people that I get that from. They say, you're doing great, man, keep it up, you know, even the messages we got from the thing prove that. Those are the things that I respond to, and I think that people like me will take less weight from a family member, but put more weight into someone who doesn't have anything invested.
Yeah, I think that when you talk about, like, getting back to our subject of judgment and internalizing it and being self-critical, that when you isolate yourself and you don't reach out to somebody, that's a red flag. It's so important for somebody, they think they can handle it, or they think they're smarter than everybody, or they can figure it out, but you really have to reach out to somebody.
But it becomes a red flag by, you know, also by not discussing it with anybody, not having that soundboard, but also having that thought like, I don't want this person judging me for the thought that I'm having.
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
But the fact is, what we don't think is, wait a minute, there are millions of people like me who are just as mentally ill as I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I've come to you and said, well, I was thinking about this and I feel really bad for having this feeling or this idea in my head. And you've come to me and said, everybody thinks that way.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that, and I wouldn't have known that had I not talked to you about it.
Yeah, speaking to somebody who's non-judgmental, who you trust, who's honest, it's hard to find that person, but sometimes even, you know, you hope that the counselors in school are those people who you can trust or who are non-judgmental. You hope that therapists are non-judgmental. You know, obviously things are confidential there, but you hope they're non-judgmental and that they don't freak out when you say something that, you know, you're saying off the cuff, but you know, you, as a person, you want to be able to trust that you can say something and that it's not going to be overblown into something.
And before we move on to the last segment, one of the things that I would like to say is that a lot of you who are watching this video are friends of mine and people that I know, and they would tell, all those people would tell you, man, Tony's a pretty judgmental person. But the funny thing is I don't see it that way. I found something that helped me get self-confidence and self-esteem. I want other people who don't have it to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And if that means that I have to be forceful with them, then that's what it needs to be done, because that was the only thing that worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe in coddling. And I don't believe in sitting there and saying, you know, oh, I feel your pain.
Mm-hmm.
No, I want to say, well, look at it from this angle, or what you're thinking is not reality, and be mean about it, because sometimes that's the only way that people respond and quote unquote wake up.
Yeah, I think, hey, I don't think there's anything wrong with being judgmental. Maybe being positive judgmental. You know, you can be judgmental and be positive about somebody else.
And it becomes a thing of, how is the message being delivered?
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's always the key, is how is the message being delivered?
Absolutely. Okay, so Truth with Tony is coming up.
Aren't you tired of being let down? Another day, another shakedown. I'm with you when hope is gone and all you want is the truth.
About 10 years ago, I was living in Camelback Village. I had no friends. I didn't really leave the house. There was a gentleman that lived above me that every time he got home from work, he would have a 6-pack of Yingling, and he would walk up to his apartment, and I would never see him again until the next morning. We eventually started a dialogue together, and he invited me upstairs to play poker one day. I went upstairs and witnessed his life. His life consisted of leaving the house to go to work. He would go to work, come home, sit there, drink, snort sleeping pills, and this is all about the self-medicating. He did that every day for several years. He would never leave the house. His mother was very prevalent in Olney, and he was always afraid that people would see what he was doing, and almost a paranoia. And 4 years ago, if you came to me and asked me, of all the friends that I had 4 years ago, who was most likely that was going to die of suicide, I would have said him. And sure enough, 4 years ago, last week, we went to Delaware Park Casino together to play poker. My wife came up with us. We took 2 separate cars. At 5 p.m. he said, "I'm going home." We decided to stay for dinner. He left, went home. The next morning I received a text message that was from a number I did not recognize. Turns out it was from a computer that was pre-programmed to send the message. And it said, "Hey, it's me. Call the police and send them to my apartment." I put "why?" The response came back saying, "Just do it." I did. The police showed up at the house. There was a sign on the door that said, "Come on in." The cops went in and found him dead in his bedroom. All the vents were sealed, and 3 charcoal grills were still lit in the room, and he was pronounced dead on the scene. These are the people that I worry about the most. The people that don't reach out. In the 4 years that I spent talking to him prior, we never talked about anything serious. He never told me there was an issue. You could see there was an issue, but with some people, you just can't start that conversation because they don't want to have it. And he is dead because of it. He was a very close friend of mine, and I had the normal reactions and normal feelings behind a friend of mine killing himself. At first thinking it was selfish, and then I thought to myself, this person was in so much pain. They saw no way out, and therefore nobody could help them. And that scares me. The whole reason I wanted to do this show was to talk to the person who is on the edge. And I can't sit by quietly and watch somebody destroy themselves when I know that there's a solution.
Thank you for joining us here on Mental Health Today. We'll be back next week. Again, this is a support system show, so your comments or questions are very welcome. We'd love to have the whole show about comments and questions. Next week, we are going to talk about bullying.
And boy, do I have some things to say on that.
And bullying not only in the past, but the present and what the future might look. That's next week on Mental Health Today. For Tony the Truth Speaker, I'm Mike Murray. Have a good week.